Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by Tom Vaillancourt, who will be talking to us a bit about the Convention of States project. Tom, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So talk to us a little bit about the Convention of States and how you got involved in this whole thing.
Well, the Convention of States project is basically about Article 5, which is the way to amend the Constitution. Most people are used to amending the Constitution by 2/3 of Congress, comes up with an amendment, and sends it to the states for ratification. What the Convention of States is that the states demand a convention, and then they came up with the amendments, and then they go back for ratification. So it takes 2/3 of the states, or 34 states, to get a application for the Convention of States.
Okay. And how many judges does it take?
And, no judges. No judges. The nice thing about the Conventions of States is, number one, the governor doesn't have anything to do with it. Governor Brown can say whatever he wants, but he has no say. Congress has no say. The Supreme Court has no say, and the president has no say. Because the whole reason for Article 5, and this portion of Article 5 where the states can ask for a convention, is because our founders knew that the day would come, then Washington would be completely out of control and drunk with power, which I think we can all safely say that day has come. I mean, you can't, with a straight face, discuss an $18 trillion debt without saying we're in deep trouble. Mm-hmm. That we have basically borrowed money from our children and grandchildren to take care of ourselves today, and most Americans don't agree with that.
Right.
So the purpose is that the legislatures, the people, the state legislators, because remember it was the states that created the federal government, not the other way around.
Right.
So the state legislators are the ones that you have to talk to, that have to say, okay, we want the Convention of States.
Okay.
So 3 states have already signed on to the application, and it's been introduced in something like 29 or 30 additional states. Mm-hmm. And the important thing about it is that the wording be all the same. Mm-hmm. Not quite this. I'm not the technical guy on this. I read a 350-page book put out by lawyers, which, of course, I'm very confused because I don't speak legalese. But basically, the wording is the same in every state. And instead of saying, for example, we want a convention of states to discuss balanced budget, we want a convention of states to discuss the fair tax, the flat tax.
Right.
What we want is a convention of states with the theme, amendments that will restrict the power of the federal government.
Okay.
To take the power back from the federal government and give it to the states.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit about the verbiage that would make that occur, because many people don't realize that the federal government isn't supposed to be the all-seeing, knowing, doing, providing behemoth that it's become. Mm-hmm. They've just always assumed that that's the one with power because it's bigger. The states get money from the federal government, and therefore they're willing to give away a lot of their power to continue to feed at the trough, as it were. What specifically are you trying to get the states to sign off on? Do you? Okay,
well, the specific wordage is the theme of proposing amendments to restrict the power of the federal government. And Mark Levin made it very popular in his Liberty Amendments. There's 11 amendments in here mm-hmm. that he proposes different ways to do that. Mm-hmm. And so the wording has got to be, for example, you couldn't make an amendment that says the federal government is responsible for giving everybody medical care, mm-hmm. because that increases the power of the federal government, right. doesn't decrease the power of the federal government.
Right.
Okay. And so the wording has to be the same. We want a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments, discussing amendments, and that will limit the federal government. Now, the beauty of this is once, let's say, they come up with 11 amendments. I'm just using Mark Levin's book as an example. Each and every one of those amendments has got to go back to the states, be debated openly, we hope, and debated, and then ratified. So the convention might pass 11 amendments, but only, say, 7 or 8 might be ratified.
Okay.
But for example, restricting power. What would happen if one of the amendments was repeal the 16th Amendment? The federal government can't tax. If the federal company can't tax, they lose all their power.
Right.
You're not going to have people going to Washington for special tax favors when Washington can't give them.
Right, but the question is that realistic, or that just if that were the example, would the states consider that realistic? Because many people don't realize there was life before the IRS, and things did get done.
Right,
and the country did have money to do things that are within the realm of those responsibilities that were assigned to them through the founding documents and everything. But we've come so far away from our roots that many people might not even realize that these things are possibilities. How do you educate the legislators to get them to propose these kinds of things in the first place? Because I've got to think that a lot of them in California have no clue. Yeah,
you're right. If you go to Sacramento to lobby, and you'll go into an assembly person's office and say, well, we can't do that because if we don't do this, we won't get funds for our roads, we won't get funding for our schools. But that's not the federal government's job.
Right.
That's your job.
Right.
And the way you educate your legislators is this gives you more power, not less power.
Right.
And that's what's important. The important thing is to bring the power of the government back closest to the people that are being governed. The closer you are to the people being governed, the more access that the average citizen has to their lawmakers, the better laws you have.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, if you were able to propose the amendments that would be that would be proposed at the Convention of States, I mean, what would be the top 5 things that you think would need to happen, just on a personal level, to limit the power of the federal government? You talked about taking away their ability to tax potentially.
Okay. Right.
You talked a little bit about possibly a balanced budget amendment, and those kind of would go hand in hand. You don't have any money, you can't.
Right. You can't
do those things. But I mean, what would you like to see happen, and what would the Convention of States project ideally like to see occur in this scenario?
Well, there's a couple of amendments that I hold near and dear. One is term limitations.
Okay.
That our founders never envisioned professional politicians. In fact, in the Articles of Confederation, there is actually term limits in the Articles of Confederation. Most people don't realize that. So term limits, I think, are important. Not only, we have term limits on the president, which I think is a good thing, but we don't have term limits on the Senate, we don't have term limits on the House, and we don't have term limits on the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has become way more powerful than our founders ever envisioned it. They envisioned the judicial as the weakest branch. But in reality, the Supreme Court is the strongest branch. So or
they reinforce the strength of the executive branch is the way that they've been utilized most often recently, it seems.
Right. But 5 people can determine how you live. That is not the way this country was founded. The reason for lifetime appointments is so they are not subject to political pressure. I understand that. But that also means they have no consequence for bad decisions. Dred Scott was a bad decision. It was eventually thrown out, but that was a bad decision. But the people of this country have always been ahead of the courts. In the founding days of this country, in the northern states, they abolished slavery long before it was abolished, long before the Civil War. In Virginia, George Washington wanted to free his slaves, but it was against state law to free your slaves. So it was the law that was perpetuating a wrong where the people were ready for it. And eventually you had the Civil War, which was fought over that. So it's a kind of we the people, and it's power back to the people.
Okay.
If you look at Supreme Court decisions, they all start out with in our opinion. It's an opinion. Okay.
So talk to me a little bit about the difference between a convention of states and a constitutional convention, because I'm assuming that people will likely get the two confused in their minds.
Right. What we don't want is a constitutional convention. We don't want a wide open constitutional convention because we don't want to change the Constitution, the basic tenets of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We want one thing. We want to reduce the power and scope of the federal government. So we don't want a constitutional convention. We want a convention of states for the sole purpose of proposing amendments that limit the federal government, not where we have a whole new constitution. Conservatives mainly really respect and honor the Constitution. In fact, the biggest argument against the Convention of States is the Runaway Convention, is that they say, well, we're going to end up with a whole new convention.
A whole new constitution.
A constitution, I'm sorry,
right.
A whole new constitution. So that would be very difficult to happen for several reasons. Number one, you have to have 34 states to call for a Convention of States. And the wording in their call has, for all practical purposes, the meaningful language has to be exactly the same. So now we got to get 34 states to agree on the same wording. And if you realize that most states, like California, have an assembly and senate, so you take 34 and double it, that's 68 legislative bodies have got to agree on the same language. Mm-hmm. That is a monumental task. But by the same token, once the amendments come out of the Convention of States, 38 states out of 50 have got to ratify it. And if you double that again, that's 76 legislative bodies have got to agree on the amendments. Mm-hmm. So that is a huge roadblock. And that's the way it should be. We agree with that. Right. We want it very difficult to change it.
Right.
And if you look at it from the other way, it only takes 1/4 or plus one state, or 13 states can stop any amendment.
Right.
So that, I don't think you're going to see a runaway convention.
So have you done any polling? Has the organization done any polling of the legislators and the legislatures themselves, as well as the citizenry, on how many of them think the federal government is out of control and think that this is a great idea to pursue?
I'm not aware of any polling,
okay.
But I know that 3 states have already passed an application for a Convention of States, mm-hmm. and it's been introduced in 29 or 30 additional states.
Right.
So we're really close to the 3/4.
Right.
Now, how long that's going to take, I don't know. But it's right now we're trying to educate everybody that there is an Article 5.
Right.
That the people do have the power to take back their lives from the federal government.
Right.
And I think that's extremely important.
I would agree that it's important. I'm just curious as to how many people also understand the risk of having too powerful of a federal government when we seem to have moved as a society to one that's more and more dependent upon the federal government for such a variety of things, like you mentioned earlier, education, healthcare, all of these things that were never intended
right.
to be handled
right.
by the federal government in the first place. And now it's just kind of the expectation that that's who's supposed to handle these things.
That's the expectation, but that's an incorrect expectation.
Right.
But by the same token, you have these same people who are complaining about excessive government regulation, who are complaining about the EPA. These same people are complaining that they can't get jobs because of different government regulations. So it's a matter of educating the people and say nothing is 100% correct.
Right.
Everything is a two-edged sword.
Right.
But you got to look at the pros and the cons, advantages, disadvantages, and say, if we keep going down this road, and again, I go back to an $18 trillion debt, and we're not even talking about the unfunded liability. We're not even talking about that.
Right.
Eventually, the whole monetary system will collapse. In fact, it almost did.
Right.
Back on George Bush's last year, the whole financial system almost collapsed. Okay.
We'll get there. Don't worry.
We're going to get there again. So what we'd like to see is we would like to see, again, it's the legislators. It's not the governor. It's the legislators. So there in California, there is 80 assembly districts. There's 40 senatorial districts. So if you have an assembly person where 100 different people are saying, we want a convention of states. We want you to talk about it. We want you to debate the issue. What we're looking for right now is education and debate on the issue. Most people don't even realize that there is an Article 5. and they didn't until the Liberty Amendments, and that's still mainly people who are interested in politics. But if we can get people to understand that there's a way to take your power back from the federal government. I mean, the big thing today is local control of your school your schools. It's gone.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just that one issue alone.
And so help people that are a little bit more mainstream, not so politically active, help them understand really. I mean, Article 5, help them. I mean, yes, it allows the taking back of power from the federal government, but can you give them a little bit more insight and digestible chunks as to?
Yeah. One of the problems with the Articles of Confederation, and the big argument on the Runaway Convention, is that the Constitutional Convention was originally designed to amend the Articles of Confederation. Well, the problem was there was no mechanism in the Articles of Confederation to amend it, which is why you have Article 5 in the Constitution, which is ways to amend the Constitution. So normally, what has normally happened is Congress has come up with an amendment, approved it by 2/3 and sent it to the states. That's the way most people understand it's done. All the amendments so far have been done that way. The Convention of States says that the people, you and I, can go to our state legislators and say, we want a Convention of States. It's closer to the people. So that's the second part of Article 5. Okay? And that's how people have to understand that if you want your state to become a laboratory of democracy like it was designed for, then that's the only way you're going to do it. You can't do it top-down from the federal government. I mean, that's been tried by many, many countries, and it's always failed. How can someone in Washington know what really happens in Mountain View, California?
Well, they assume that they can, right? But it doesn't necessarily work that way. I mean, people are also under the misinterpretation that the Constitution is a living, breathing document and needs to be revised constantly in order to keep up with the times, etc. The courts are not, and we started to kind of joke about that previously, but the courts aren't supposed to be the ones that are amending the Constitution. It is supposed to go through this type of process driven by the people. But again, we've lost our way to the point where most folks, I don't think, have a clue that this is even a possibility.
Well, I think they do now. I think they're learning. You can use 3 examples. The Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts, changed one word in Obamacare, and he changed the word fine to tax. So he literally, from the bench, rewrote the Affordable Care Act. That's not the Supreme Court's job. The Supreme Court job is to decide whether it's constitutional or not. But he did it and got away with it. The president we'll just use the amnesty issue. Care what your feelings are about amnesty, the question is the president didn't have the right to do that. And then you look at Congress itself, which has taken the Interstate Commerce Clause, and it's all out of whack. For example, the Supreme Court says there's a right in the Constitution to privacy. I've read the Constitution from front to back. I can't even find the word privacy in there. So you can just go on and on. How I think the expression is that our government is following the Constitution the way the Supreme Court says the Constitution is, not the way the Constitution is written. And giving credit where credit is due. The one thing that the Obama administration has done is made everybody conscious of the Constitution. A lot more people. I mean, I'm even reading John Locke, who our founders used as a basis for the Constitution. So I'm a lot more knowledgeable than I used to be.
So talk to me a little bit about what the Convention of States project is trying to do to reach out, and which of the 3 states has adopted, and which look like they're next to fall in line.
I know it's Alaska, Florida, and Georgia have. And the other ones, it's being discussed or not. I don't know what's going to fall in line. Basically, originally when the Convention of States project started, they didn't really hold out much hope for California because it's such a liberal state. But in actuality, we're starting to get some traction here. And the whole purpose is to build a grassroots organization. The Convention of States Project is started by Mark Meckler and Mike Ferris, and they've both done grassroots before. As Mike Meckler was a co-founder of the Tea Party with Jenny Beth Martin. So they're very familiar with grassroots. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a district captain in every congressional district in the state, and then have that district captain get 100 volunteers to communicate with their assembly person or senate person to let them know that this is of interest to them. I think what we're trying to really say is this is a tool. This is an arrow in the quiver to control government. And now we think is the time to use that tool. So it's a matter of educating the public, talking at Rotary, Aquinas, that kind of thing. Shows like this, the different Tea Parties, different conservative groups, and liberal groups. Because this is really not a Democrat-Republican issue. It really isn't. You will find that Democrat senators and Assembly are just as frustrated with the federal government as Republicans are. So it's an issue that crosses ideology. It's a simple question: who's going to run your life? Is the federal? I mean, Common Core comes out of the federal government. I don't care whether you're pro or con. You can't argue the fact that the federal government is going to tell you what your kids have to be taught. Obamacare is going to tell you you must carry a certain kind of medical. I mean, all these, and like you say, people are used to the federal government doing this. But for everything the federal government does for you, you lose freedom.
And it does something to you. And many people, as they're preparing their taxes this year, are starting to learn the ramifications of the Affordable Health Care Act and the fact that if they didn't afford it during the year, they're going to have less money to afford it this year because they're going to be taxed.
Pay the tax, pay the fine. That's absolutely right. I mean, you can go on and on about. I could go on and on about Obamacare.
It's a special sweet spot for you.
Yeah, I could go on and on about it. But it's the whole point that I think if people would understand that if they have a grievance with the government, what's their best chance of getting that grievance addressed by the government? Is it going to Sacramento and visiting your assembly person's office or your senator's office? And number one, most people don't realize they can go to Sacramento and walk right in their assembly person's office and somebody will talk to them and listen, and you can drop off something with your grievances. And if enough people do that, that will get to the attention. But you can't really do that to the federal government. I mean, most people in most states live within reasonable driving distance of their state capital. Most people in this country do not live within reasonable driving distance of Washington, D.C.
Well, in theory, they could go to their congressional representatives' offices, but many of them don't know that they exist, and they're never there anyway.
They're never there anyways.
So we've only got less than a minute left. Tell us a little bit more about where people can find more information about the Convention of States Project.
The best thing to do is to go to the website, which is conventionofstates.com, and you will find tons of information in there. You will find videos put out by Mark Meckler and Mike Ferris, who can explain it a lot better than I can because they've been living with it for a long time. And there's handbooks there, there's information there, there's ways to get involved, and there is a petition that you can sign online. And when you fill it out online, that petition will automatically be registered with your state legislator that you signed it.
Excellent.
And the whole goal is to get at least 100 people in each assembly district to sign and send it to the legislature because we want their attention.
Got it. Well, Tom, thanks for coming and sharing with us this evening. If you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
Come back. And that was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We thank them tremendously for the ability to have this show, and we're on our 3rd year already, or actually I think this is our 4th, but they've made this all possible. And while we appreciate that, what they're best known for is their speaker series. And they have many upcoming speakers at 432 Steerlin Road on the 2nd Tuesday of the month that may be of interest to you. The show normally starts around 7 o'clock, and coming in April, John J. Miller from Hillsdale will be speaking. In May, Alan West, a well-known name in conservative circles, will also be presenting at the forum, coming in from Florida for that. And in June, Catherine Engelbrecht, founder of True the Vote, will be speaking at the forum. The forum is, as I said, at 432 Steerlin Road, about 3 minutes here from the studio, and you can find more information at theconservativeforum.com. As Tom and I were speaking this evening, and it's come up on previous occasions as well, many people have lost sight of the fact that really the states are the ones with the power as opposed to the federal government, and more of those responsibilities that used to fall on the shoulders of our state representatives at the legislature have been lost or ceded to the federal government in exchange for money. And what we've realized is as these freedoms go away, we have less and less control over how our children are educated, how much tax is extracted from our wallets, and many of the other things, for example, choices in our health care and whether we decide we want to have it or not or fund it ourselves. These are all things that could be potentially reined in if what Tom was talking about, the Conventions of States project, is successful in rallying legislators from around the country to go ahead and take that power back. So look into the the Convention of States project, find out more, and let your neighbors know about what's happening and what's possible for you and taking back that control. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. This has been The Right Side, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on the show or in person sometime soon. Have a great night.